Hey everyone! Before we embark on this incredible journey into the past, I'm asking you, subscribe to the channel and hit that bell. Because the story we're going to unravel today isn't just dry facts. It's a detective story, a spy thriller, and a political conspiracy all in one. And the main thing, it's the truth. The very truth that was hidden behind 7 seals for decades. Stay with me until the end, because in the finale, I'll ask you the main question, and your answer in the comments will become part of our investigation. Let's go. Have you ever heard of a battle that never happened? Of a clash where allies shot at each other, and then the whole world pretended nothing occurred? Today, we'll peek into one of the most mysterious and carefully buried pages of the Great Patriotic War. We're not talking about heroism on the battlefield, but about a strange, murky story smelling of gunpowder, betrayal, and high politics. The story of how, on the 7th of November, 1944, over the peaceful Yugoslav town of Niš, Soviet and American pilots clashed in a deadly duel. And at the center of this tragedy, the death of a combat general, a hero, Grigory Petrovich Kotov. Why did this happen? A mistake? Or a cold, calculated intent? Let's figure it out together. To understand the scale of this story, we need to transport ourselves to the autumn of '44. The world is changing before our eyes. The Allies, the USSR, the USA, and Britain can already smell the common victory. The Red Army is crushing the enemy in the east, the Allies are advancing in the west. But, friends, alliances are a very tricky thing. They are always temporary, especially when the enemy is almost defeated and it's already time to think about what the post-war world will look like. And here begins a quiet, invisible war. A war for the future, for influence, for pieces of the post-war pie. Winston Churchill is already actively contemplating his infamous Operation Unthinkable, a strike against Soviet troops. The Americans with their Atomic Manhattan Project, which Stalin, by the way, already knew about thanks to intelligence, also look at the USSR not only as a brother-in-arms but as a future geopolitical rival. And it's against this backdrop in Yugoslavia, where Soviet troops, side by side with local partisans under Tito, are driving out the Germans, that something unthinkable happens. Let's imagine that day, the 7th of November. For a Soviet person, the main holiday, the anniversary of the Great October Revolution. Even at the front, they tried to celebrate it. In the 707th Assault Aviation Regiment stationed in Niš, a festive mood. Squadrons are lining up on the parade ground. Red flags are proudly flying. Music is playing. The pilots, who went through the hell of Stalingrad and the Kursk Bulge, allow themselves to exhale for a minute. They earned this holiday. And 2 kilometers from them, at the airfield, stand their combat vehicles, the legendary ILS, flying tanks. And at this very moment, to the sounds of the march, planes appear in the sky. At first they thought Germans. Frams, reconnaissance planes Focke-Wulf. But it's strange. They're not just conducting reconnaissance. They are diving onto the airfield, and hell begins. Bombs, rockets, cannon, and machine gun fire. Our planes are torn apart, fuel tanks are burning. People panic and rush into the trenches. They can't understand what's happening. Where does a reconnaissance plane get such powerful armament? About 5 minutes later, the first shock comes. From a neighboring airfield, a pair of yaks, our fighters, take off. They crash into this carousel of death and immediately shoot down 2 planes. And here, in the smoke and fire, one of the experienced pilots makes out the outlines. These aren't German frames. These are twin-boomed, strange, iron-like machines. And on the wings, stars. But not red ones. White in a blue circle. These are Lightnings. Fighters of the U.S. Air Force. P-38 Lightning. Allies. Imagine the shock, the rage, the complete bewilderment. What the hell? The first thought. Maybe they didn't recognize their own? But how? The weather was clear. The identification marks were large and clearly visible. And the main thing, the column of the 6th Guards Rifle Corps, which was moving along the road, was marked with all the required signals. This wasn't a scattered detachment, but a whole column with equipment, with staff cars. And this column became the primary target. And in the sky, a real air battle is flaring up. To help our little hawks, 8 fighters arrive led by a true ace, hero of the Soviet Union Alexander Koldanov. He was only 22, by the way, but he was already a legend, the master of the sky. And he sees lightnings are methodically strafing our infantry on the ground. What must he have felt? He couldn't just watch. Our pilots first tried to signal with gestures. Our own. Cease fire. They risked being shot down, flew up close, waved their wings. Some Americans apparently understood, turned around, and left, and a short, deceptive pause ensued. But, friends, this is where the strangest part begins. Before our fighters could even turn back to their airfield, a second wave appears on the horizon. Another 30 or so lightnings. They make another pass on the column. This is no longer a mistake. You can't repeat a mistake twice within minutes. The Americans had excellent radio communication. The pilots of the first wave surely reported that they had attacked Soviet troops. The command knew, and still sent a second group. This was an order, a cold, calculated order. And here the rage of our pilots overflowed. They were no longer waving their wings. They opened fire to stop the killers. The air battle became deadly. Both yaks and lightnings burst into flames and fell. In this meat grinder, 2 of our brave pilots died, Junior Lieutenant Shapulia and Lieutenant Kravonigic, who had been fighting since the very first day of the war. Severely wounded Lieutenant Zestovskik miraculously survived by parachuting out. And on the ground, it was a nightmare. The staff car carrying the Corps commander, Lieutenant General Grigory Kotov, was shot to pieces at point-blank range. General Kotov died on the spot. He wasn't just a general. He was a hero, a holder of 8 military orders, one of the architects of the brilliant Yashi-Chisinau offensive, the Stalin strike. A man who went through the entire war died not at the hands of a fascist, but from the bullets of those he considered brothers in arms. In total, that day we lost 34 people killed and 37 wounded. 30 trucks, 4 cars, and 3 fuel tankers burned. The result of the air battle: 5 downed lightnings and 3 of our yaks. Now let's ask ourselves, how did Washington react to this? What did President Roosevelt personally do? And here, friends, politics begins. When Stalin was reported about this, and they reported to him only the next day, they say he was furious. He immediately called it a provocation. And he was absolutely right. The Soviet Union sent a sharp, harsh protest, demanded an immediate investigation and punishment of those responsible. And what about the Americans? They started talking nonsense. First, they claimed they were flying to bomb Germans retreating from Greece near Trieste. But excuse me, Trieste is Italy, and Greece is a whole other part of the Balkans. And from Niš to the border with Greece is 400 kilometers. So, they got lost by 400 kilometers? Elite pilots in modern planes? I don't believe it. Then they came up with a second version. Supposedly, the target was the road Skopje-Pristina. Missed again. To that road, 150 kilometers. 2 groups of the most experienced pilots got the coordinates wrong twice? That's laughable. It's offensive. And here we approach the very essence. The motives. What was it? Version 1. A grossest mistake. The simplest and most convenient for both sides. It was eventually accepted as the official one. They say it happens. Va. But, as we've already figured out, the chain of mistakes is too long and absurd. It doesn't hold up to any scrutiny. Version 2. A provocation to test the reaction. The autumn of '44. The Allies are already thinking about how relations with the USSR will shape up after Germany's defeat. And what's the best way to probe the strength, endurance, and combat readiness of an opponent? Arrange a small, local skirmish. See how Stalin reacts. Will Soviet pilots engage in battle? Will they fire to kill? How will the command on the ground behave? From the point of view of cold military logic, priceless data. At the cost of several dozen lives of Soviet soldiers and 1 general. Version 3. Targeted elimination. And let's look at the figure of General Kotov. A convinced communist, a talented commander, a graduate of the school of the fiercest battles. A man who would clearly play a significant role in the post-war army, and possibly in politics. He is part of the future Soviet elite. And what if someone in the West found a strong, united proletarian Yugoslavia under Tito, actively supported by the USSR, very disadvantageous? What if even then there were forces for whom the future Cold War was as necessary as air, and they were taking the first trial steps toward it? Eliminate one of the promising Soviet military leaders on foreign territory, writing it all off as a mistake, elegant, cynical, and effective. On the 14th of December, 1944, American Ambassador W. Avril Harriman brought Stalin official apologies regarding the incident. The case was hushed up. The commander of the Lightning Squadron, Colonel Edwinson, not only faced no punishment, he made a brilliant career and became a brigadier general. Investigation materials from both sides were classified. For decades, why did the Soviet Union remain silent about this? The logic here is ironclad. The country was preparing for the greatest victory. Revealing a conflict with the Allies on the eve of the final assault on Berlin was unthinkable. They had to swallow this bitter pill so as not to break the shaky alliance. But in the memory of the participants and the command, this day remained a bloody, treacherous stain. And what do we have today? We have an example of how geopolitics and big interests grind human lives into dust. How the concepts of ally and enemy can change in an instant. The story of the battle near Niš is a parable that teaches us eternal vigilance. It shows that behind beautiful words about friendship and cooperation, cold calculation often hides. And General Kotov and the ordinary soldiers who died that day became hostages of this big game. So what was it, in your opinion? A fatal coincidence? Or the first swallow of the Cold War? The first shot in a hot war that hadn't even ended yet? Write in the comments what you think. I'll read every answer. This story must not be forgotten. It must be a lesson for all of us. If the story touched a nerve, if you want others to learn this truth, like this video, your like is a signal to the algorithms that such topics are important. And of course, subscribe to the channel. Ahead of us are many more abandoned paths of history, many secrets that scream to be uncovered. Together we can get to the bottom of things. Thank you for being with me until the end. And remember, history does not forgive forgetfulness.